Our presenter today is Austin Little. Austin is a University of Illinois Extension horticulture educator in Southern Illinois. He covers Jackson, Franklin, Williamson, Randolph, and Perry counties. With that, I will let Austin take it away.
Thank you, Maggie. And good afternoon, folks. So today's topic is thermal composting. So happy May Day to everybody. And depending on where you are, hopefully you got some nice weather today. So we're getting started here. Thermal composting. So the extended title is Use Your Soil's Superpowers, because kind of the composting unlocks a lot of potential of our garden soils in the home garden. So what we'll be talking about today is we'll talk about composting and how it works on the microbial level, and kind of we'll look at different forms and practices for composting. And I've got vermicomposting on there. We'll see the amount of time that we have. I think we've got till 2:30. We may just briefly brush on vermicomposting, and that really is a large enough topic that I think that it deserves its own separate talk, but we may just touch on it quickly today, depending on the time that we have, and we'll have time for questions here at the end. So let's talk a little bit about what soil is as a component, or kind of the environment where compost is going to be utilized. So soil is it's not what we call dirt. So dirt is what we're going to be sweeping up in the kitchen or washing off of our cars, and it's going to be something that we're just kind of, what makes things dirty. But soil is the unconsolidated mineral or organic material, and both mineral and organic materials, on the immediate surface of the earth that serves as a natural medium or interface for growth of land plants and all the other biological activity that goes on in soil. So soil can be thought of as the interface or the environment where all of these biological and chemical processes take place. And it's comprised of minerals, organic matter, living things and dead things that are still considered organic matter, and then gases and liquids. So those are the major components of what makes up soil. And we'll look at the textbook composition. What are the parts that make up soil, the percentages. So an ideal soil is going to be, this is kind of the dream soil, and that's going to be majority mineral content. So that's going to be the inert mineral, inorganic materials. Then we have organic matter, and that's the lowest percentage. So that organic matter is going to be comprised of materials that are both living and non-living. Well, maybe there's 1% of that in there that is the living component, and then the 5% is the decomposing or composting component there. So that's 5%. And we have then equal amounts, ideally, of water and air porosity and water holding capacity. So if you'd like to learn more specifically about soils and soil structure, soil health, I recently did a talk on specifically soils as part of the Beginning Gardener webinar series, and this is the link there that you can follow to see that video. And if you'd like, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel. So plugging our unit YouTube channel there. Okay, so organic matter. What exactly is organic matter? And this is the majority of what compost is. This is the major component of compost. So organic matter, or soil organic matter, is the non-mineral part or of the bulk material in soil. So it's more than, there's more to it than meets the eye. soil organic matter is comprised of once living material that is broken down or in the process of being broken down by soil organisms like bacterias, fungi, nematodes, actinomycetes, which are another kind of bacteria, oomycetes, and amoebas. All of these different microbes are working on processing organic matter, and even themselves are turning into that organic matter. So once they've deceased and are no more, they themselves turn into this organic part of the soil. These organisms are utilizing soil organic matter as a food and an energy source, and either when digested or when they die, these nutrients and materials become what's called humus. So it's not to be confused with the dip, hummus. So this is humus. This is the final stages of organic matter. So these organic matters, the reason we call them organic is they have a carbon group, a carbon functional group, which is a chemical molecular structure. So that's why we call these things organic. They have that in common. They all have carbon and nitrogen as well. So ideally, in a garden soil, we're looking at, we like to have between 4 and 6% of this organic humic or humus material in our garden soils. 6 would be great, but 4 is good. Okay, so let's talk a bit about humus. Humus is the stable and final stage of organic decomposition and processing. So humus is what makes soils dark. It gives it that dark color, and also it gives it the earthy smell. That's due in part to humus. It also contributes to soil structure, soil condition, and cation exchange capacity. So cation exchange capacity is the ability of a soil to exchange nutrients between itself and the roots, the root zones of plants. And then what are the benefits? What are the main benefits of starting a compost pile or a composting project at home? Long-term soil fertility is what we're adding to the soil when we add compost. So that gives us increased yields, improved output, and improved returns from our garden. Yeah, it improves soil structure, as I just mentioned here, and that makes more efficient use of water and easier access to nutrients, better access to nutrients for the plant roots, and it creates a healthier soil that's more friable, and that just means it's easier for roots to grow and move through the soil. And we're also building a desirable microorganism population with compost that's thriving in compost and creating a healthier soil environment, a healthier soil food web. And we'll talk about the soil food web here, but this microbial population is really important for keeping in balance pests and diseases in soil, and thereby creating healthier overall plants. And if a plant is healthier, it's going to be more resistant to stresses like diseases and environmental stresses. So a little bit more about what compost is at the kind of the finer definition of composting is the controlled decomposition of organic materials into a soil-like substance. So it's not soil. Compost can be thought of as a component of soil, and it's nature's process of recycling materials. Everything gets recycled and turned back into soil. And so microorganisms are kind of the driving force of this at the molecular level. And so these microorganisms, the major players here are bacteria, fungi, and actinomycetes. And those account for the majority of the decomposition, processing, and activity that's taking place in a compost system. And A byproduct of this chemical breakdown that they're doing with digesting and processing and their life cycles is the heat. So it's an exothermic chemical reaction. So the byproduct is putting off heat, and that's thermal digestion. And actinomycetes are one of these beneficial bacteria, and they're going to be really critical for breaking down the toughest parts of plant fibers like lignin. But what's interesting is they're a major component in composting. But when we have a summer or spring rain, when you smell that kind of spring rain or summer rain smell that's rising off of the ground, that's caused by actinomycetes. That's a chemical reaction that's happening when they're exposed to water. And we'll get even a little bit more zoomed in here on what's happening within these humic substances in compost. So these are the building blocks of compost. And looking at the finer molecular level, the finest components are the organic compounds called humic substances that make up humus as a whole. And they function to give structure, porosity, water holding capacity, cation exchange capacity. And so these are crucial. These acids and molecules are going to be the critical interface that allow for nutrient uptake by roots, along with clay particles. So clay and humic substances are the major, or what are the major responsible forces here for nutrient uptake. And so we have humic acids, and these are the most abundant in nature and on Earth, and they're going to be larger than the fulvic acid molecules or compounds. And these are, the fulvic acids are water soluble under acidic, neutral, and alkaline conditions. So they're soluble in all conditions, in all pH conditions, and are a lot smaller compared to the humic substances. But that means they're in greater contact with the fine tertiary or feeder roots of plants, or the fine root hairs that plants use to take up nutrients. And then we have human, not to be confused with humans. This is humin, not soluble regardless of any pH. So this is, and it's the most dense, greatest molecular weight, and it's the most permanent part. It's like the final, it's the end of the end stage of organic matter. So this stuff doesn't change over time, and it's going to be the most responsible for soil structure. So just a little bit of in-depth information here on humic substances. And now we're going to talk about what is going on with the soil food web. So what we're looking at here is kind of the life cycle of energy. Is it, and all energy starts from plants. It all starts, at least in our terrestrial environment, it all starts with photosynthesis and plants storing and turning energy from light, air, and nutrients from the soil and water into usable energy, which the first trophic level of organisms, that's photosynthesizers. The secondary trophic levels, so trophic levels are where an organism is in the food chain. So at what point does it take on energy through this soil food web? So as this energy moves through the trophic levels, it eventually reaches we go through the second, third, fourth, and it eventually reaches an apex predator. That's whatever the apex predator or consumer is. That's where the cycle restarts. So that animal there is going to be the beneficiary of all of this nutrient and energy cycling until it gets to it dies, and now it's going to be recycled back to the second trophic level. All of these other trophic levels are going to be breaking it down and returning those resources back to plants eventually. So that's kind of the life cycle there of the food web in a quick summary. So we mentioned composting critters here. So again, these are the organisms we focus on the most in composting because they're doing the most work. These are going to be aerobic, oxygen-breathing bacteria and fungi, and there's millions of them in 1 gram of soil. So they obtain energy from the carbon and the fixed nitrogen in plant materials to build their cells, and in decaying other organisms, in other decaying organisms and byproducts. So these organisms are all recycling and processing biological material, and they use this to build their cells, to reproduce, and to fix nutrients into a plant-ready form. And again, the byproduct of this is heat, which is created by their metabolic activity. And so hence it's called thermal composting. And so an important part of this to have a basic understanding of is the nitrogen cycle. And this is our good old nitrogen cycle diagram here. Really what I have this here to show is how important the microbe portion of this is, how important the microbe activity is here. And so nitrogen fixing bacteria use enzymes to release or excrete ammonium. And so this ammonium is then fixed by nitrifying nitrogenase bacteria into nitrate. And nitrate is the most plant available form of nitrogen. Plants will also take up ammonium, but it's easier for the plant to take up nitrates because what happens in plants is they immediately convert it to ammonia, which is NH3. So it's easier. It's just easier for them to use that as an energy source instead of NH4. It's not too critically important. The important part here is understanding the different functions of these bacteria in our composting process. So that's why with composting, it's good to let it mature and maybe what you'd call cure, so that these nitrogenase or nitrifying bacteria can convert more ammonium over to nitrates, which plants are going to be more readily able to take up. And so there are 3 basic thermal phases of aerobic composting. And so the cooler phase is the psychrophilic phase. So that's going to be the slower, cooler phase of anaerobic or aerobic thermal composting. And so these bacteria that are psychrophilic bacteria are active anywhere from they can be active even around freezing, but generally between 55 to 70 degrees is that psychrophilic phase. Then we have mesophilic, and that's going to be the most active phase for most composting bacteria and microbes, and that's going to be between 70 to 100 degrees, and that's where the most recycling and digesting is going to be going on. And then we have our hottest phase, which is kind of the end phase, and that's going to be thermophilic, and that's between 113 up to 160 degrees. And the heat generated during active composting is going to repel most organisms, most unwanted organisms that we don't want in there, kind of pests. But this active thermal composting, once it gets to about 120 to 160 degrees, that's where we'd really like to get our compost close in that range, because that's where we can start to kill off any diseases that may be in the material that's in our compost, plant diseases or harmful bacteria or things, viruses, things like that we don't want in there, or harmful fungi. But that's where we're going to kill off a lot of the weed seeds that might be in our compost. And so looking at what organisms are most active at these different stages, this is just kind of an interesting piece of information here. So in the mesophilic stage, you can see we've got bacillus and streptomyces in there. So these are just different bacteria species, and then we see down here we've got different fungi down here that are more active at the mesophilic stage, and then these are what are going to be more active in the thermophilic stage. And so the cooler stage, the psychrophilic stage, we've got there is microbial activity happening, but it's more actinomycetes, bacteria called arthobacters or arthrobacters. And so there is microbial fungal activity going on, but it's at a much reduced rate. So here we see where activity really ramps up. So this is going to be in our psychrophilic phase here, where things are happening, but kind of slowly. And then we get into February, March, things start to become more active. And so this is going to be kind of our psychrophilic or cool phase. And then this is going to be more kind of up into July. That's going to be our mesophilic area of peak metabolic activity. So that's where things are really going full speed, and we're getting a lot of composting done. And so when it gets to the hottest part of the summer, that's when we head into our thermophilic range here, where it's a bit too hot for a lot of microbes, and it's kind of out of their range of comfort. And so we kind of hit a dip there. But as we get into cooler autumn weather, we start to get a little bit ramped up thermophilic or mesophilic activity until we get to first frost, and now we're going back into that psychrophilic activity. So the question comes up is, can I compost over winter? There is still activity, it's just at a much slower rate. If you cover your compost with some kind of tarp or something, you can retain some of the heat, but it is still going to slow down because it's being cooled from the ground as well. So as the surrounding soil ground gets cooler, it's going to absorb a lot of cooler temperatures. All right, now we're going to talk about one of the major important components here to think about is the carbon to nitrogen ratio. So the carbon to nitrogen ratio is the amount of carbon to the amount of nitrogen in the material that we're putting into our compost. So bacteria produce all kinds of enzymes and molecules and compounds that break down these hard to digest lignins, cellulose, and pectins. These are the things that create plant cell walls that we call fiber, that animals have to have specific, specified structures and rumens and things like that to break down. But that's how the bacterial population does it, with enzymes. And materials with high ratios of these complex carbons, we call those brown materials because they're slower to be digested by bacteria. And the bacteria take longer to break those down because they're using up all the available nitrogen, so their reproduction slows down and their metabolic activity slows down. So when we say that nitrogen is being locked up in the soil, what's really happening, there's just too much ground material and not enough microbial activity. And so the microbes are using up that nitrogen while trying to digest the higher amounts of carbon. And so you get that slowdown. So that's really what that means. And so therefore we don't get the thermal activity there, which can be an issue because if it slows down too much, we can start to get into anaerobic conditions where there's lack of oxygen, and we don't want that in this type of composting. And so the materials with higher ratios of nitrogen to carbon are going to be what we call green materials, and these are quick to be digested by microbes in comparison to the brown materials, because there's more available nitrogen to the carbon compared to the carbon relative to brown materials. So this helps piles heat up. It helps to get that thermal activity sped up. So too much, though, can be an issue because it can overheat the pile and the system, and it can kill off our composting microbes. So these ratios need to be in balance. So again, we just are trying to avoid anaerobic conditions. And so that carbon to nitrogen ratio, the golden ratio or the ideal ratio is around 30 parts of carbon to 1 part of nitrogen per weight. So for examples, grass clippings is 19:1. So that's 19, whatever the amount is, 19 parts to 1 part nitrogen. Whereas leaves from our trees or oak trees or something is going to be around 40:1. So if we take equal mix of each of those, it would give us approximately a 30:1 ratio in our compost pile. And a little bit more about browns. So this high carbon materials. Some examples are leaves, straw, paper, sawdust. Sawdust is very high, so you need to be careful with sawdust because it has an extremely high carbon and nitrogen ratio. And manures, animal beddings are somewhere between 30 and 80:1. And our greens are higher nitrogen materials, so kind of more of the fuel that we can use. Vegetable scraps are between 12 to 20:1. Coffee grounds are around 20:1. And grass clippings are, again, around between 12 and 25:1. And let's look at another set here of ratios. And so we've got all kinds of animal byproducts, manures, 20 to 25:1. Poultry, that's going to be what we call hot, because it's got a really good nitrogen or high nitrogen to carbon ratio. So that's going to be a hotter manure, whereas something like cow or horse is going to be a bit higher in the carbon ratio. And these are generally what are categorized as high carbon there. And this is from Nebraska Extension, good resource there. And let's talk about some ideal conditions for aerobic composting here. So the proper conditions for composting, we need adequate oxygen infiltration in airspace, so between 50 to 65% by volume. We also need pretty high water content, because the microbes that we're trying to promote in our compost live in a film of water around on the surfaces of this organic matter. So this is where their environment is. And so obviously the air and water space is going to fluctuate, because if we've got 50% air and 50% water, where's the room for our other materials? So these things will fluctuate, but the bulk material or matter is surprisingly small compared to the size of the pile. A lot of green materials are going to be mostly water. So it is something to be aware of, the amount of air and water that we need in this process. And the particle size is also important. We want to keep particles between 1/8 of an inch, which is pretty small, to no more than 2 inches. And our carbon to nitrogen ratio somewhere between 25:1 or 40:1. And so if we know that we put in a bunch of leaves or a bunch of straw or cardboard or whatever brown materials in there, we need to balance that with an equal amount of a green material. And so how do we control or monitor these, control these factors? So air factor is key to aerobic composting. We got to have oxygen in there. And to do that, we need to be turning our compost at least once a week to keep that air incorporated in there, so we don't lose that airspace. Again, the moisture factor, hydration is really important to keep our microbes alive and functioning at a high level. And so again, we're looking at that 40 to 60% moisture content, so that they have that film that they can live in. And temperature factors, the higher temperatures of up to 140 to 160 indicate rapid decomposition and processing, digestion, and below that is slow. And so if our pile isn't heating up, that might be an indication that we have something's awry here. Maybe there's not enough oxygen. Maybe it's too dry. There's not enough water. We need to water our pile and mix it in. Or it could be an imbalance. We've got too much brown material to our green material. And so there's lots of different composting systems out there. The one that I have used, and I think is probably the lowest cost of entry as far as the learning curve, is going to be stall or bin composting, and that's going to be this wooden structure here. But there are a lot of tumbler or kind of modular systems like this that we can get at the garden center or the store, and those are widely available. And if we've got limited space, those are a good option, and they're easily maintained, easy to turn, and good for kitchen waste. So if we've got a lot of kitchen waste that we just want to go throw in here, that's great. The only thing is, it kind of, at some point we have to, once it's full, we got to let it decompose and digest. And so therefore a period of time, we don't have any place to put our other scraps. And so we kind of have to wait till this is finished cooking till we can start the next batch. So if you're doing tumblers or bins, it might be a good idea to get 2 of them, so that you have one that's kind of in the processing and finishing stage, and then you got one that's more fresh materials. So sheet composting is the oldest form of composting, and it could be as simple as, in the fall, spreading out unprocessed, uncomposted materials, and then tilling them or incorporating them into the soil in the spring. But you can be more precise with sheet composting. Sheet composting can be where we're top dressing compost every spring or every fall. Maybe we're applying a less processed, a less finished compost product over a layer of green materials, and in the fall, and then incorporating those in the spring when we go in to start our gardens again. So it's really, or just burying material in our gardens. It's the most primitive form of it, but I would recommend at least getting things halfway processed before layering or doing sheet composting. And then another very simple approach is just the open pile, which we've used before at our office, or at my parents' house. We've used that, and it's very just basic. Just turn things over time, and in a few years, it's not the fastest, most efficient form of composting, but over time you will get compost, and it's the lower maintenance version, I would say. And then we have vermicomposting. And vermicomposting uses worms to produce really rich, nutrient-rich compost. And this compost also is really rich with beneficial enzymes and plant growth regulators and things that really help plants to take up nutrients and create a healthy soil environment. And they help moderate pH as well. So vermicomposting, yeah, that's using worms to create vermicompost. And so vermicomposting, while it is a component of thermal composting, there is vermicomposting activity going on. That's not really the main focus. What we're focusing more on is that microbial activity with thermal composting. And vermicomposting really is its own kind of focus, where we're really focusing on the worm activity there. But the bacterial part of composting is also important for vermicomposting. So it's another complex topic that we'll do a different talk on. And again, so stall and bin composting, that's what we're looking at today. And it's the most common backyard composting method. You can get them pre-made or in a kit, or just make them yourself out of pallets to create stalls. And so there's a couple of YouTube videos here that I will let the audience view on their own time. And I'll get in trouble if I play those, so you can check those out on your own. And so this is an example of this 3-stall kind of structure here. And the idea is we have one stall that's our fresh material, one stall that's processing, and then we have a finished stall where we can store our finished compost and let it cure for a couple weeks longer, or just take as we need it. So we have these staging stalls here. So just a PSA, if you're going to do the pick up some pallets method, you really need to make sure that they're newer pallets and that they're not treated with copper arsenate, creosote, or methyl bromide. These are toxic materials that are used in treating wood, or were used in treating wood. And they can leach into your compost. So you don't want those volatile toxins in your otherwise happy, healthy compost. So, and as I give this PSA, here's this stall example that I made last summer, and this is more of a demonstration. But these pallets probably aren't what you'd want to use. This was more just to demonstrate the construction. And so I just found these in my garage. I don't know how old they are, but it's kind of time was an issue. But I just picked up some hardware, some brackets, and kind of drilled this together. It took me maybe an hour. And the cardboard you see down here is to suppress weed growth from coming up from the soil. And so ready-made tumblers, there are tons of these ready-made systems. They're a little more expensive than the DIY version, but they're really convenient for if you've got limited space and if you're just processing small amounts of kitchen waste, that kind of thing. But again, you might need more than one to really have a system that's up and running, and so that you can get a little bit more out of it and not have such a wait time. And we'll look again here at the pile and sheet, just a visualization here of the pile composting, the most simple form of composting. But the thing with the pile composting is it can't be any more than 3 feet high, or you start to get issues with the interior getting too hot. So again, you can run into issues where it's getting too hot or getting out of hand. But it's easy to create this kind of system. So things that we can compost are yard waste, kitchen scraps, any kind of newspapers, cardboard, these kind of recyclable kind of papers. There may be, there's ink and things like that. I suppose some of those could have some toxicity to them, but I don't really know to what extent, or if they neutralize in the compost. I know that there is some concern about that, but I've used shredded paper as mulch and these kind of things. I think the issue there is probably something to look into more. I would say it's not too big of a concern though. So things that are recommended that you don't compost, these are going to be meat scraps and bones, any kind of animal byproduct is going to be an issue. It's in diseased plants or invasive weeds. So it's the thing about, it goes back to being able to get the compost pile or system to a high enough temperature to neutralize a lot of these things. And over time, eventually, sure, these things will break down, but we might be inviting pests and other issues to our pile. Animal byproducts can take a long time to break down and be a nuisance more than anything, and create public health issues. So those things are recommended against. And yeah, with diseased plants or invasive weeds, we have to try to make sure that it gets to that highest temperature that we can safely get to neutralize those things. So it's kind of up to the operator of the compost as far as what you're willing to try to process in your compost. But definitely, I would say stay away from any kind of animal byproduct. And then some other care and tips here for our compost. Passive is kind of that pile where you maybe turn it every month or so and just let it sit, and that takes a while longer. So if you're not in a rush, maybe that's okay. If we're taking more of an active management approach, we're going to be turning it at least once a week, keeping it watered, making sure we have that proper carbon to nitrogen ratio. And then we can, if we're starting in the spring, if we get into our thermic composting phase, we can get usable compost by early fall. And real quick, some troubleshooting here, looking at common issues. If we have a smaller area, if we're really just limited to a small backyard, a modular bin might be the best option. it's taking too long to compost, to digest and turn into a usable product. Maybe we need to adjust the ratios of our green to browns and look at those other conditions such as water. Is it getting enough air? You know, those management factors. Also, maybe we've got too many large pieces of sticks and twigs in there, so we need to break that stuff up. And okay, if we've got some bad smells, some unpleasant odors, could be that there's too much nitrogen in there, not enough O2. So we might be getting into an anaerobic condition, or maybe it's a pH condition, where if our pH is too high, that's going to cause a type of bacteria that's going to release more volatile ammonia, and so that's not a good that's not an ideal setting for our compost. So if we have too low attempts to kill disease, weeds, and kind of fungus and the unwanted parts of the microbial population there, yeah, that's going to be a temperature kind of situation. And again, we can adjust those things. And we mentioned attracting animals. If we're any kind of food waste, like fruit, vegetable things that animals might be attracted to, trying to put those in more of the center or bury it a little bit in the compost can help. Or with these, with the stall kind of pallet systems, we can cover those in chicken wire and have an opening if it's a major problem. If we've got a lot of raccoons and whatever getting in there, maybe we need to make a little enclosure for it. And if our compost is getting too hot, we can aerate it, add some water, add browns, and that will help to cool our compost down. And so kind of just having like you can get a handheld thermometer that can use basically read the temperature from a distance, or you can just get a thermometer with a long extension on it that you can poke in there and take the temperature periodically to keep an eye on the temperature. And so the finished product can be used for mulch so the early stages of compost, if we're using it as a top dressing, can be used as a mulch to keep weed suppression down, to keep weed growth down, and to help retain moisture in our soil, and to eventually incorporate into our soil to give us all those great benefits of nutrients and fertility in our soil. And that later finish stage is really great for enriching our soil and just helping improve kind of all of the factors of soil health. And it's once we get to that later stage, it's mostly been converted over to humus, to those humic substances, and that's really going to be the gold that's going to improve all of these things about our soil and make it a really productive, healthy soil environment. And by doing these things, we're helping to reduce our need for chemical fertilizers and other kind of amendments as well. So this is kind of helping to reduce our costs and reduce our inputs into the soil. And what that's doing by extension is creating healthier plants that need less pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and we're getting more out of them. We're getting, ideally, we'll get a higher yield and better return out of our garden. So all good things. And now with all this in mind, it's important to take some time and think about some factors and what you want to do with your compost and how much space you have. So the amount of compost you think you're going to need, and what you're going to be doing with it. Is it more for kind of ornamental or just kind of informal gardens, or are we really trying to use this to make a really productive and successful produce garden. So kind of thinking about what we're using it for. Now, certainly, it's great just to have some compost around to mix into soil when we plant new plants, whether they're going to be more landscape ornamental, or whether it's going to be for an herb garden or containers. You know, we can mix in compost in containers as well. So having an idea of the amount that we're going to want to use and what we might be using it for. How much time do we think we're going to have to spend on it? Because if we're really trying to go for the more active management, we'll need some time each week. However, if we want to do the more slow kind of hands-off approach, the more informal approach, then we can kind of just turn it every couple weeks, every month at least, and it doesn't need quite as much attention. And then what is our gross factor? So I guess that kind of has to do with what kind of materials we're using, and if we're using vermicompost. If we're looking into vermicompost, that's going to be high on a lot of people's gross factor. But you know, compost really it shouldn't be gross. If it turns into something gross, then that's a signal that we've got an issue. If it's turning into this gross, mucky kind of thing, it smells bad. You know, it doesn't. Compost should have an earthy, almost sweet smell. It really should not have a off-putting kind of smell or anything like that. So kind of keeping in mind, it is this biological process. So making sure we know our gross factor, and how committed are we to the process. You know, like with any garden project, you know, what's our commitment level? And so I'm just really quickly going to brush on, briefly look at vermicomposting. So as we kind of mentioned, vermiculture is another form of composting where we're really utilizing the activity of worms. And so this is the raising of worms under controlled conditions, and using a mixture of, so vermicompost is a mixture of partially decomposed organic matter, their worm castings or their waste, their bedding, decaying, the dead worms are in there, cocoons, and some other bacterial microbes in there as well. So worms use actually bacteria in their systems to create worm castings. So they are a factor in there. Yeah, worm manure, that's what worm castings are. And so they're a highly concentrated and rich nutrient compound. And the worms that are used are the most common worm species is Icenia fotida, and that's a red wriggler is what that is. But that's the most commonly used. But other species like the earthworm, which is the Lumbricus rubellus, that also works. And I am actually planning to have another talk that is just focusing on vermicompost. We've got one coming up for another group that we can that's going to be available. So this is going to be another talk, and I'm just going to move through these so that we have some time to answer questions. Oops. And the uses of vermicompost are going to be very similar to compost, our thermal compost products. So used as nutrients for seedlings and as a soil amendment, supplemental fertilizer, mixing it into containers, all of those things. So really, it's used in quite the same way as our other compost. And there's some resources for your for you to take a look at there and do some more do some more study and research here. And so let's go ahead and answer any questions about thermal composting.
Okay, all right, thank you, Austin. We do have some questions. So starting back from the beginning, we had a question of, can ammonia be added to compost in order to speed up the process?
Ammonia I think what they mean is probably ammonium,
Oh
and
yeah, and I may have wrote it down wrong.
no, yeah. Ammonium is going to be what you're going to find in a lot of commercial fertilizer. That's NH4, and that's
Oh yeah.
what you're going to find in a commercial kind of traditional kind of or synthetic fertilizer. And I would recommend it because what you're going to be doing is you're going to be taking that microbial population out of balance. You're going to have a huge influx of microbial growth. They're going to use up all that nitrogen, and they're all going to die probably because they've used up all that energy. And then yeah, I think it would probably cause issues with the amount of microbes in your soil. It would cause an imbalance of that carbon to nitrogen. So if you have too high of a nitrogen ratio, you basically accelerate the reproduction and recycling of your microbes. But once that food source is gone, that population is going to crash and have to kind of slowly rebuild. So I would say it's better to just try to keep that ratio of greens to browns in mind, and that's going to I get the idea of trying to speed things up, but these microbes, trying to keep these processes in balance, it does take a little time. It is on their time, so to speak. So I wouldn't recommend it personally. I mean, I don't know if somebody else would. I just first response, I would probably not. Now, however, you can take process. You can add vermicompost, some really nice vermicompost to your compost, or or it might even be beneficial to add some finished compost into your new pile, and also taking some good topsoil and mixing that in is going to help to kind of seed or kind of inoculate that pile so that it's got a startup of microbes to get it going a little faster.
Okay. The next question we have is, and I actually had to go outside during this, so I'm guessing they were talking about how hot you got the compost, like internally, like to make it active. So their question was, are these active composting degrees of the air? If not, how do they get the compost to be that hot?
Well, that's going to be the temperature, of the material in the compost, and that has to do with it is a factor of the outside temperature, in so much as the temperature rises, certain thermophilic bacteria and fungi, these microbes, they start to become more active. So they're correlated, but it's not just because it's getting hot out. It's because the environmental temperature is reaching that point where they naturally become more active. It's the ideal for them. So you could have hotter temperatures outside, but something is up with your compost pile, and so it's not necessarily due to the air, but it's a part of the outside temperature. So those higher temperatures are going to be, you're not going to be able to reach those temperatures in an outside system in the early spring or later fall, because for one, it's not the right temperature for those thermophilic microbes and bacteria to activate. Okay, does that answer the question? I hope.
Yeah, I think so. So okay, our next question is, what do you think of the Ruth Stout method of composting, spreading fruit and vegetable waste, etc., around the plants that are growing and established? It's a no-till gardening with compost left in place.
I mean that's a pretty primitive kind of way to compost, and I guess I haven't heard of that specific name of process, but it sounds like something that would be part of a more of what we call a permaculture kind of practices. I'm if you've got excess material, I suppose it wouldn't hurt anything. My thinking though is if it's vegetable and fruit kind of waste that isn't really done, processing and decomposing, is that some animal is going to come in there and take it, or kind of, I guess if you mixed it in a little bit, but it does go back to that carbon to nitrogen ratio. It depends on what's the ratio of those materials. Sometimes a lot of fruit can be high in acidity, so maybe you want to keep an eye on pH there. But overall, I mean, I don't think it would hurt anything. If you're wanting to kind of do more of an informal, where we're just going to take our vegetable waste and kind of our our garden, I think that could work. But it may be that if it's on the surface, that it's going to take longer for it to break down instead of in the soil. And again, kind of the idea of composting is we're accelerating this process. So it's kind of like the compost can be thought of as kind of a fire. We're throwing these things in and turning it into the thing that we want a lot sooner. So I think it would be fine. It just would take longer in the long run.
Okay. The next question I actually did answer on there, but I don't know if the person saw it. It was, how do you know if pallets are treated or not? I actually called my husband, who is a woodworker, and he said, and his coworker both said they didn't think there were any treated pallets. They're all untreated, except if it is, it would have like a greenish tint to it, like treated lumber does. But they both said that they have not seen a treated pallet before. So
Okay.
if anyone needed to know that.
My understanding is pallets built after the early 2000s are not treated. None of those are treated.
Yeah.
Before that, though, it's questionable. And that's something that I would recommend doing a little research on, because there are codes on newer, and I'm sure that they're right that they don't treat them anymore. I mean, they're kind of a disposable thing, so why spend the money on treating them? But there are codes that you can look up that are printed on pallets that are treated, that'll tell you if it is. But if those codes aren't on there, then it should be okay.
Okay. The next question is, so invasive, wait, hold on, I think I missed a question. Did I ask if weed seeds are killed off at a higher thermophilic temperature, will that also kill seeds off of autumn, fall, and fruit if added to compost piles? Did you get that?
I think they're just asking if it'll kill off all of the seeds.
Yeah.
And it just, it will. I mean, once you get up to 160, that's going to neutralize almost all seeds. It just depends on if it gets that hot enough for a couple days, or a couple weeks. If you're adding them in fall, that's going to be the time that things are going to start to cool down. So it's not going to neutralize or kill those until it gets back up to those thermophilic temperatures, and that will be in the summer. So I think the answer is to wait till summer. It's hot.
Okay. Okay, so invasive weeds, they were asking if invasive weeds should just be all thrown away or go into a landfill, or let the city take them to an industrial composter. Is that what you should do with your invasives?
I think that's the right idea. If you want to live on the edge, you can try to compost them, but again, you gotta make sure that it gets up to those high thermophilic temperatures to neutralize it, and that doesn't always happen for long enough. Yeah, remove or the removal and the disposal of invasives are throw them away, burn them. If you have an area, if you have a burn pile or something, but or if you have a municipal yard waste pickup, get rid of them that way. But it's generally recommended to not compost invasives and diseased plants. That's kind of the agreed upon recommendation.
Okay. We had a question about, they said that they had a relative who would put a whole fish in the garden to compost down and give nutrients. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and I've heard about this practice. It's kind of it sounds like a historical thing where, and I've like about tomatoes, where you put a fish, you bury a fish with the tomato and you plant it, and the fish fertilizes the tomato and all the nutrients and all of that. And that would really go back to kind of the same. I would say that's the same concept as putting materials around the garden. I mean, it eventually will break down. My only concern there would be that you'd get some kind of weird conditions in there. But I have heard about that. I tried it. I haven't really researched it myself, so I'm not going to say one or the other. But it's not the first I've heard about that.
Okay. And then we did have someone talking about rabbit droppings in the compost, and we did have someone kind of interject in the chat box saying that animals that have a more vegetarian diet, their manure could be composted, but others, like a cat, dog, human, that kind of thing, is no.
Yeah.
So give your thoughts on that, on just
Well,
the which manures.
yeah. So as we mentioned here, let's go back to this, and these are the animal manures that we're going to say are really good for composting. So cow, horse, livestock manure, poultry, these kind of things. But yeah, when you get into carnivore kind of manures, or definitely human, you run into issues with diseases where it starts to get kind of dicey. So I'm going to recommend against that.
Okay. Any experience with aeration tubes in horse manure piles?
Aeration tubes. No, I don't think so. I mean, I suppose, it's just another practice of keeping flow, and again, as we said, air is really important. You need 40 to 65% oxygen permeability. So I don't know exactly what that is, but it sounds like a good idea.
Okay. And there's been a few questions just added in here. Do you have any opinion about municipalities producing biosolids from wastewater treatment facilities?
I mean, yeah, that's going to be a very precise process that's going to be done by a professional agency, and they have ways of purifying and mitigating that disease issue. But I wouldn't recommend it for the homeowner. Yeah, but it is something that's done where municipalities process human waste and that kind of thing into usable compost. But it takes they have specialized processes, and I would just leave that to the professionals. But it's something you can buy. I mean, it's safe to buy from a manufacturer, but that's I wouldn't recommend. Don't do it at home.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question we have, is it worthwhile to add black plastic covering on a sunny 50 to 70 degree day to help warm up the pile in the spring and fall?
Sure. Yeah, that'll help things speed up a little bit. And that's going to be more of that active management approach. So if you're going to do that, you need to probably make sure that it's not getting too hot and that it's got enough water and those kind of things and doesn't dry out. But yeah, that'll give you that'll raise your temperatures and move things. That'll get things moving a little quicker. I don't think that alone will get you to that thermophilic stage of things, but it'll get you quicker results. Yeah.
Okay. When trying to achieve an ideal ratio of shredded maple leaves and grass clippings, you mentioned adding equal amounts. Can you please clarify if that is by weight or by volume?
Good question. I would just go with volume. You know,
Volume, is that what you said? You kind of cut out. I couldn't hear you.
yeah, I would just do it by volume.
Okay.
Well, it's. I mean, by weight, I don't know. I think it doesn't have to be that precise. If we don't need to weigh out our grass clippings, precisely. I would get close to. I would try to think in terms of weight, but just by volume should be okay. If grass clippings are probably a little more dense than like shredded leaves, right? Shredded leaves are going to have more airspace and that kind of thing. So maybe we need a little bit more, leaf or shredded leaves or leaf litter to our the grass clippings. So by volume there, the volume and weight are going to fluctuate a little bit. But I think kind of just, it's okay to kind of eyeball it,
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, so we have one more question. Can you add wood ash to a compost pile?
Wood ash. Yeah, you can, but use it sparingly. Wood ash is going to acidify. That's what it's used for in kind of the garden and kind of in the wider kind of context. But I would say if I wouldn't really use it unless you're trying to lower your acidity or make your more acidic. And if you do, like maybe the recommendation is half a cup per like 5 gallons of material. So if you're going to use it, I would say use it sparingly, but it will. The thing is, if you don't need to acidify your compost, then it will increase acidity.
Okay. We've had a few questions about the URLs on your slides. We will be able to email those out here today. We will get them to all of you. But other than that, thank you guys so much, and thank you, Austin.
Thank you. Yeah, yep. Those URLs, this will be posted to our YouTube.
Probably within a week or so.
Account, and this is our YouTube account here. So you will be able to view these on our YouTube account and be able to see all those URLs.
Yeah, and I don't think your screen is showing, Austin. I can't see it. But I will, I just sent everyone out an email about 10 minutes ago with the evaluation for this, and please try to fill that out if you can. They really help us. And also in that email is our YouTube channel, and you can see other things we have done. And then Austin's information, phone number and email is also in that email. So if you want to see that, and we will try to get, we'll try to get those URLs, see if we can't just pull them off of there and email them out to you. But thank you all for joining us, and enjoy the rest of this beautiful day.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.